Alright, so early last week, news made it to the airwaves that Jamaica was named the most peaceful country in the Caribbean by something called the Global Peace Index. That was a good headline, but people were divided on what it means to be peaceful and whether we are so peaceful as the report would suggest. But instead of getting into which side is right or wrong, I want to answer a more basic question, and that is what is this index and what's actually driving the number? So, the report is produced by something called the Institute of Economics and Peace, or IEP for short, and it's an independent non-profit think tank, hate that word. They're headquartered in Sydney, Australia. Now, they were founded back in 2007 by an Australian entrepreneur, and his name is Steve Kililea. Mr. Steve, if I slaughtered your name, I apologize. Now, the whole idea behind it is to treat peace as something that you can actually measure, not just a nice abstract idea, but something with real economic value you can track over time. And when you look at it, they were started in 2007, and that would mean that this year is about the 20th edition of the report. Now, here's the part that's genuinely useful to understand before you look at the ranking. The GPI makes a specific distinction between two ideas. Idea number one, negative peace, and idea number two, positive peace. Sounds very interesting. Now, negative peace is the simpler one to understand. It just means the absence of violence or the absence of fear of violence. So that's negative peace. Now, on the other hand, positive peace, which we can consider the bigger idea in the whole thing, is the actual attitudes, institutions, and structures that create and sustain peaceful societies over time. And here's the key thing: the GPI specifically measures negative peace. It tells you how much violence or fear of violence exists in a country right now, not whether that country has built the deeper institutions to stay peaceful long term. That's an important distinction to make, and it's worth keeping in your head for the rest of this video. So, how do we actually turn the absence of violence into a number? The GPI uses 23 separate indicators and it groups them into three domains. So the ongoing conflict domain, it has 6 indicators looking at whether a country is involved in internal or external conflict and for how long. The societal safety and security domain, now this is the biggest domain because it has 11 indicators and they cover things like homicide rates, incarceration, violent crime, political stability or instability rather, and how safe people say they feel walking alone. The third domain is the militarization domain, and it has 6 indicators tied to military spending, weapons imports and exports, and the size of a country's armed forces. Now, every indicator gets scored on a scale of 1 to 5, with non-numeric ones, like political instability, set into 5 groups, and the numerical ones get scored directly using real data. Now, this isn't just a spreadsheet exercise where numbers are put into a table and a formula is used to generate the outcome. A group or groups of economists and analysts pretty much take this information and they review it, make sure it makes sense, and where information is missing, they come up with their own methodology of substituting or understanding why that is the case. Now, the scoring is then reviewed through a multi-level process involving regional directors, a custom research team, and an external advisory panel. Now, this is specifically done to keep the report consistent and comparable across all 163 countries. Globally, this year's report found that of the 23 indicators that are tracked, 14 fell, 8 of them improved, and 1 didn't make any change. The single biggest observed deterioration globally was on deaths from internal conflict, and this was found to have been driven heavily by what's happening in Sudan and the Ukraine. On the other hand, the single biggest improvement was on UN peacekeeping funding. So when you look at all of this, the number really isn't standing still. It's moving on a year-by-year basis, and it's based on real specific events. All right, so that's important to note. Now, let's bring this back to Jamaica. In the IEP's own words about this year's report, Jamaica performed the best in the ongoing conflict category, and this reflected low levels of both internal and external conflict. And its militarization score was also solid compared to other nations in the region. But it was slightly weaker in the safety and security domain. Now, this is the one that reflects higher crime rates and how safe people say that they feel. Jamaica's overall score ended at 1.919, and this saw the country being tied for 70th globally with Serbia and third in the North and Central American region behind Canada and Costa Rica. But here's the detail that's worth looking at. Jamaica's score actually got slightly worse this year. It increased by 0.030 points, and this caused it to drop one spot in the rankings. Most peaceful in the Caribbean and slightly less peaceful than last year. Now, these headlines can both be said to be true at the same time, and that's not really a contradiction. It's just what happens when you look at the relative regional ranking against how the country's performance looked year after year. All right, so one of the main takeaways from this report is that the Global Peace Index really isn't measuring peace in some poetic, complete sense. What it's really looking at is the absence of violence and the fear from it, or the fear of it rather. And they use 23 very specific, very different indicators that are scored by a large team of analysts and then combined into one single number that they change every year based on the occurrence of real events. So one honest thing worth noting as well is that if you look at all these 23 genuinely different measurements, whether it be crime rates, military spending, deaths in conflicts, and fold them into a single number, you're really simplifying a very complex and complicated issue. Admittedly, it's a useful simplification, and the IEP puts a lot of work into how they build it. But honestly, a single number can never tell you the whole story about a country, which is exactly looking why at these three domains underneath it, like we just did with Jamaica, usually tells you more than the headline rank alone. All right, so this is how I see it. This is my take. It was very interesting learning about the GPI and the IEP and how they measure peace and so on. So I don't know if this makes sense to you. Let me know what you think about it. Is there anything that you think is missing? Drop a comment, give a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Catch you on the next one.